Welcome everyone to Appamada's 2021 Precepts program. I'll start by saying I'm not going to use the term class, right? Because this is not a lecture series or something where myself or the other guest teachers who will be here are going to just rain our knowledge down on you. This is a program, an experience-based year-long program to immerse yourself in unpacking the precepts. And so today we'll talk about that and how that's going to go. And our outline for this year, sharing together, and where we go from here. So just to begin, let me introduce myself. My name's Todd Bankler. I'm what they are calling one of the entrusted teachers here at Appamada. So we have two senior teachers, Peg and Flint. Peg having Dharma transmission in Suzuki Roshi's lineage, but originally being taught by Joko Beck. And Flint also studying and ordained in Suzuki Roshi's lineage as well. And then there have been three entrusted teachers who've kind of come up by practicing in Appamada, myself, Joel Barna, and Lori Winnett, who will likely be participating at some point. So I've been practicing with Appamada since about 2009, so coming up on about 11 or 12 years. And before that, I kind of had a present moment awareness practice that went round and round in circles for 4 or 5 years before I found Zen practice and Zen study to help direct it. That's enough about me. So in the typical class format, we will start each class period by doing 15 minutes of sitting together. It is Zen practice, by the way, so of course we're going to sit together. Then we will usually do 10 minutes of free writing, so please bring pen and paper with you. And the free writing is just another way to help us digest this information that we're taking in. So it gets it into a different part of the brain. So we'll write continuously and use it to kind of process what you've been observing in the last month. And there'll be a prompt for that each time. So nothing you need to think ahead about.
Hello.
And Joan, you'll need to go on mute if you're. Thank you. All right. So since this is the time in the program where we would start handing out a bunch of things, but we don't have handouts. So instead, I've just emailed you a link to a web page that we're setting up specifically for this Precepts program for the year-long study together. And I'll put it here in the chat window as well. And while we're doing that, let's see, we'll be technologically savvy and I can share my screen. So let's see. Yes, it is letting me. Okay. So, great. Oh, and interesting. It doesn't show the chats or the other stuff. That's neat. All right, so we have the Precepts Program 2021 webpage. So when I say, refer to a handout, the handouts will be down here on the left-hand side. Right? And there's also some other resources that we'll post more as we go through for additional learning. Maybe not things that we cover in the class, but that you might find for if you want to delve deeper into any of the topics. Okay. So with that, we are going to start by doing a bit of reading. as a way of introducing the precepts. So first, I'd like to just start by asking you, the participants, what do you think the precepts are? Does anyone have, an idea of that? Some experience in the past, or maybe some notions, or I'd just love to hear kind of what you're bringing into it. Why are you here, and what do you think the precepts are? How do you view them? And we'll just go in popcorn order. Anyone who can speak up, who feels so moved, just remember to unmute yourself.
So I'll go first. I just finished the 6-week class with Peg Syverson on what causes suffering. And I found it really fascinating and wanted to learn more about Buddhism. So I have no idea what the precepts are, but that's just kind of where I'm coming from and what I know so far.
Great, thank you.
I read the first part of Diane Rosetta's book, the part that I could get as Kindle sample before my book actually arrives. And so the thing that struck me about what she said was that the precepts are not thou shalt nots. They're more encouragements to live in an examined fashion. She didn't say that exactly, but I think that's what she was communicating.
Yes, thank you.
I'll go next. And I feel like I'm a real beginner here, but
Good, we need real beginners. We need that perspective.
I sort of, my understanding of the precepts thus far is there are really an approach to bring practice into your actual lived experience in the day-to-day, just the day-to-day order of things.
Thank you. And so glad to have beginners here, right? We really want that perspective. As a matter of fact, Zen practice is about trying to keep that beginner's perspective even after you think you know something. So it's good.
I can go. This is Mary Beth, and I took the precepts in 2013, and I am back to take them again. And I consider myself a beginner, so always. And what I remember from learning about the precepts before, and what I've tried to do with my life since learning about the precepts, is they're my aspirations. How I aspire to live my life.
Very well said. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, then if no one else has anything, then we are going to move on. I apologize for me not looking at the camera and doing multiple laptops. This is a new interesting challenge of being in the Zendo in this way. Okay. All right, so we're going to get into, by way of the introduction of the precepts, a little reading about the precepts in various forms. So this is a handout that Peg's used in the past, where she's assembled together kind of different ways of interpreting the precepts done by different teachers. And the handout, it says, it's on the website, it says precepts various forms. I'll display it here momentarily. Desktop. share. And now we gotta figure out how to get, I'm also not a Mac user, so it makes it an extra challenge for me. It's there. So precepts, various forms. And what I'd like to do is, if this isn't too cumbersome, let's go around the virtual room and read a paragraph at a time. Right? So we'll take, I won't put you on the spot, we'll take volunteers. Would someone like to read the first paragraph?
I can read it.
All right.
Okay. Pali Canon, 5 precepts as gifts, Anguttara Nikaya 839, 245 through 47.
Yeah, you can skip that. That's
Thank you. There are, O monks, 8 streams of merit, streams of the wholesome, nourishments of happiness that are heavenly, ripening in happiness conducive to heaven, and that lead to whatever is wished for, loved, and agreeable to one's welfare and happiness. What are the 8?
Who can continue for us?
I can go. Here, monks. A noble disciple has gone for refuge to the Buddha. This is the first stream of merit, stream of the wholesome, nourishment of happiness. That is heavenly, ripening in happiness, conducive to heaven, and that leads to whatever is wished for, loved, and agreeable to one's welfare and happiness.
Another volunteer?
I can go. Further, a noble disciple has gone for refuge to the Dhamma. This is the second stream of merit that leads to whatever is wished for, love, and agreeable to one's welfare and happiness.
Further, a noble disciple has gone for refuge to the Sangha. This is the third stream of merit that leads to whatever is wished for, loved, and agreeable to one's welfare and happiness.
So I'm just going to pause there for a minute and introduce that this is from the Pali Canon, which is the kind of the oldest written record of the Buddhist teachings. And what they've just gone through is in the Zen tradition, we refer to the 16 Bodhisattva precepts. In various traditions, there'll be different numbers. But these are kind of the 3 introductory treasures, the triple treasures in Zen, which is taking refuge in the Buddha, taking refuge in the Dharma, and taking refuge in the Sangha. So it was a little bit hidden in the language there, but in these 8 streams of merit, you know, a noble disciple has gone for refuge to Buddha, he's gone for refuge to the Dharma, and refuge in the Sangha. So continuing, whoever would like to continue.
So, there are further, monks, these 5 gifts, pristine of long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated, and never before adulterated, that are not being adulterated and that will not be adulterated, not despised by wise ascetics and Brahmins. What are these 5 gifts?
Here, monks, a noble disciple gives up the destruction of life and abstains from it. By abstaining from the destruction of life, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. By giving to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression, he himself will enjoy immeasurable freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. This is the first of those great gifts and the 4th stream of merit.
I'll read next. Further, monks, a noble disciple gives up the taking of what is not given and abstains from it. By abstaining from taking what is not given, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. By giving to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression, he himself will enjoy immeasurable freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. This is the second of those great gifts and the fifth stream of merit.
I'll read. Further, monks, a noble disciple gives up sexual misconduct and abstains from it. By abstaining from sexual misconduct, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. By giving to immeasurable beings, by giving to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression, he himself will enjoy immeasurable freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. This is the third of those great gifts and the sixth stream of merit.
I can go. I can read. Further, monks, a noble disciple gives up false speech and abstains from it. By abstaining from false speech, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. By giving to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression, he himself will enjoy immeasurable freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. This is the fourth of those great gifts and the seventh stream of merit.
I'll go next. Further, monks, a noble disciple gives up wines, liquors, and intoxicants, the basis for negligence, and abstains from them. By abstaining from wines, liquors, and intoxicants, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. By giving to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression, he himself will enjoy immeasurable freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. This is the fifth of those great gifts and the eighth stream of merit.
These, monks, are the 8 streams of merit, streams of the wholesome, nourishments of happiness, which are heavenly, ripening in happiness, conducive to heaven, and which lead to whatever is wished for, loved, and agreeable to one's welfare and happiness.
Thank you. That worked out better than I thought it would. It's so nice to hear everyone's voices and to be able to virtually pass something around and read together. So you might have noticed, not once did they say, "Thou shalt not." I think we're all so used to experiencing the precepts through kind of the Judeo-Christian 10 Commandments, right? That they have similar things they talk about not stealing and not killing. But one of the reasons that we like to bring this to the class is that it really characterizes the precepts in a different way. It introduces them as gifts, right? It's a gift that you can receive. It's a gift that you can give to those around you, right? They talk about what you enjoy from observing the precepts, what you enjoy by not violating the precepts, right? So by abstaining, for example, from the destruction of life, the noble disciple gives to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. And by giving to immeasurable beings freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression, he himself will enjoy immeasurable freedom from fear, hostility, and oppression. Right? So this is a gift that we can receive, that's always available to us. So you, at any time, you could give those around you the gift of freedom from your own anger. Right? If you're angry, you could give them the gift of freedom from that. It's not about you not being angry, but it's just the concept of the precepts as gifts. This is why we often talk about receiving the precepts. We'll talk a little bit in a moment about Jukai ceremony, or the precept ceremony, we call it here in plain English. In the Japanese tradition, it's Jukai, or lay ordination. But that's a very formal ceremony, which is voluntary for those that wish to at the end of this year-long course, to formally receive those precepts as gifts. If you're wanting to take those on, to try and act out a life that's in accord with them. Right, so they're a gift that we can receive. They are not thou shalt nots. And it's an important way to distinguish it, because this is the attitude that we want to bring to them as we enter into this process. So this is a description of what a disciple of the Buddha does. It's a description of what the disciple of the Buddha does not do. If you aren't observing the precepts in a particular moment, then in that particular moment, you're not a disciple of the Buddha. You're not acting as a disciple of the Buddha. Oh, looks like Lisa has joined us. She said she would be a little late. Sorry, did I hit the right button? Is Lisa in with us?
Hi. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. I thought I hit cancel and not admit. Thank you for joining. Glad you could make it. So we're just going through the precepts as gifts. We just read a little introductory statement. And in your email or in the chat window here, you should have a link to a web page where you'll find this information. So continuing. We were just saying, if in that moment you are not in accord with the precepts, you'll notice there's no moral valence here. There's no judgment. It doesn't say a person who lies is bad, right? Character flaw, you're in trouble. If in the moment that you're lying, then you are not a disciple of the Buddha. You're not walking that path. Right? This is a description of the path. It was also helpful for the Buddha to make sure his followers and his Sangha were known as being adherents of the precepts, right? That it allowed his Sangha that was living on and in and around other communities to be trusted. So in this handout, we won't go through the rest of it. We did the round the room reading of the beginning. You'll see, I'll just show it to you a little bit. There are a traditional way of describing the precepts in traditional Buddhist terms. There's also Diane Rossetto's way, and we'll talk about this as we get into the book. She states them in a kind of positive affirmation instead of a negative that does not kill, right? She says, I take up the way of supporting all life, or I take up the way of speaking truthfully, right? So it's a very different way of positioning them. And then from the Brahmanet Sutra or Mahayana Sutra, there's a little more of a expounded version that I'll let you go through on your own. And then there's also a version by Norman Fisher, who's a very famous Zen teacher here in the United States. He does some excellent writing, has many books, highly recommend. And then you'll see the term grave, and you'll see the term treasure, and we'll speak about that just for a moment. Okay. So I'll stop the share for a moment there. So in our Socho Zen tradition, we, as I said before, we generally recognize 16 Bodhisattva precepts. And those are broken into 3 categories. We have the 3 treasures, or the 3 refuges, or the triple treasure. And this is taking refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the Sangha. And then there's the 3 pure precepts, which are also known as kind of the root precepts, that are kind of the ground at which all the others rest, which is not creating evil, practicing good, and actualizing good for others. So similar to the Bodhisattva vow, right, to save all beings. And then the last are the 10 grave precepts, and that's the ones that we could probably name most of. Not to kill, not to steal, not to misuse sexuality. All right. So that is the introduction to the precepts. And now we'll talk a bit about how we're going to approach them here.
Todd, I'm sorry, Todd, before we leave that, you were talking about the 16 precepts and the way they're divided. Which version are you looking at? Norman Fisher's?
No, I'm just talking about in general how they're broken down.
Okay.
On that particular handout, I don't think they're really broken up that way.
Okay.
They talk about the 10 grave precepts, and in the beginning, the first 3 paragraphs we read were the triple treasure of taking refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. But each teacher and each format has a unique way of presenting them often.
Okay.
So our method here is to basically live our way into this exploration of the precepts over the course of a year. Peg likes to talk about how when she was being ordained and she was in a monastic practice in the Pacific Northwest, with her teacher, she was given an instruction. Well, go study the precepts, write something about it, bring it to me, and then, we'll go through the ceremonial process. And she talks about how that was not very satisfying for her, right? Like an individual study program that seemed very academic wasn't as fruitful, right? And here we believe much more in experiential practice and something that's relational. So this is why the Precepts program has been adopted this way here. Right? So we have 12 months, and that leaves, a month of time in between the taking up of each precept. We'll group a few of them together. If those of you are doing the math and about to tell me I can't do math, don't worry, it'll work out. But generally, we'll have about a month of time to steep in it, right? Spending a month thinking about not lying, right, or taking up the way of speaking truthfully is an amazing way for you to uncover all the ways you tell little lies all throughout the day, right? And not to say that there's anything wrong with you, right? This is how we are, myself included, of course. But it's not academic. It's in here, like, oh, I just exaggerated that. Why did I even do that? I didn't even think I wanted to impress that person, right? But yet the little light goes off and you realize, oh, there's something going on here. And so we're going to give you tools to try and unpack that. And when we get back together, we'll have time for writing and reflection and observation. And right, so that's really not academic at all. It's really experiential. So the Precepts program is not a class, it's your life. It's your life with a focus. So we're going to give to you every month a focus area to try and take it deeper. And let's see. With that, I will just show you for a moment. Let's see. Just testing all of my technology skills. So one of the links on the website that you were sent was the Precepts program plan for the year. One thing I can probably guarantee you is that this will change. As a matter of fact, in our first class today, we were going through an introduction, and then we're going to talk about Hakomi, which is a assisted self-study and mindfulness. It's a psychotherapy modality that we kind of use bits and pieces of here. But depending on time, I may want to leave that to the next gathering, where hopefully, some people will be in person, and doing the little exercises will be a little easier to navigate. And then later today, we'll talk about the learning record, which is a way we're going to keep track of our progress as we go. Next time, and you can see off to the right, there'll be a reading before the class. I've noticed I've put in the key core book that we're going to be using, which is Diane Rossetto's Waking Up to What You Do. Is that backwards? I can't tell. But that's on the website. You should have access to that. So there's readings there before each class. So before the next class, you're going to be asked to read the first 5 chapters of the Rossetto book. It's very accessible reading. It's not very academic. It's kind of a lighthearted, easy read. So those 5 chapters they'll go by pretty quickly. So don't be concerned. I will add some other suggested readings from the 6 Perfections book, the Dale Wright book here, which I do not have in this outline yet, but I'll get that to you. So in the second month, we'll go through internal family systems, which is another kind of psychotherapeutic modality that helps people work with the things that they notice arising. So just to warn you, this program has a way of bringing to light kind of all the ways we are in the world, right? And some of them can be a little disconcerting for us when we start to realize kind of some of the ways that perhaps we're behaving subtly. And so things like Hakomi and IFS, or internal family systems, just help us figure out, what to do with those things and how to work with them. So this is definitely not psychotherapy, but we're trying to give you some tools for your toolkit. And then we'll start with the first precept in the Rossetto book. She does it in a different order, which I think makes sense, and one of the reasons we like the book. But speaking truthfully, I won't go through all of these, but you can see kind of the flow here of the year. So we'll go through 1 main precepts a month. So speaking of others with openness and possibility. Then usually we'll also have kind of an extra topic, whether it's the Hakomi or IFS, or we'll talk about the sewing practice one time. We'll also talk about right use of power. We won't have class in December. I will warn you, the November class is the same week as Thanksgiving on that Tuesday, so that could be a little bit of a problem for some people. But in case you do miss any class, these are recorded, and they will be on the same Precepts program webpage. The recordings will be there, along with all the other handouts. And then at the end of the class, I think I already mentioned, their ceremony will be available. We'll talk a little bit more about that as it gets closer. And that of course, is optional. So our approach here at Appamada is that Zen is a relational practice that really, every encounter we have, whether it's with others or a plant or a sensation we're having, is really a relationship. It's a meeting. It's a meeting between ourselves and others, or our perspective of our own mind and our own thought. But that Zen is always fundamentally relational. And the precepts are an inquiry into the quality of relating, right? What is the quality of that relating that's happening in that moment? Really, the precepts, they wouldn't make any sense if it was just you. If you were the only person on the planet, if there was no interaction with another, they'd have a very different understanding or different meaning, if at all. So it's really about the quality of relating. The Buddha's objective was not for individuals to become enlightened, although that was part of it. But he was working on how to bring into existence a sane and happy civilization, right? And that always involves relationships. He was interested in giving people the tools they need to live a happy life and be relieved from suffering. He wanted to give them a quality of relating that was free from hatred, ignorance, and anger. This is what he taught. And the Buddha taught the precepts his entire life. He taught it everywhere he went. He taught the precepts to kings and to commoners. It was an offering he made to help people create relationships and live harmoniously together. So we're going to take these precepts in. We're going to learn how to relate to them, with them, and then extend those out to our relationships with every person we meet. So we need to get intimate with them. We need to have the beginner's mind that we were talking about, Allison. Right? An inquiring mind. One that doesn't think that we know. One that's open and curious about what we might discover, what might actually happen. As part of the process, we're going to use some writing to help deepen our understanding. I mentioned the free writing we'll do at the beginning of each class. And we'll also, as we get into the learning record, there'll be opportunity for writing as well. So we're going to do this exploration together over the year as a group, learning how to wrestle with it and unpack it in our lives. And not just when you pick up a Buddhist book, right? It's going to come up at your work, with your boss, with your family and your friends, right? In each of these relationships, there'll be little moments of discovery. So keep that inquiring mind with you as we go. And you're going to learn how you're experiencing what you're practicing. So with that, I want to encourage you that this is a marathon, not a sprint. Right? This is why we're taking it slowly together. Right? This is not about you finding better judgments to make against yourself, or having more ammunition to judge yourself as better than or less than other people. As we said, the precepts do not have a moral valence on them. They're not, this is good and this is bad. It's not that kind of thing. Peg likes to say they're more like laws of physics, right? They describe what happens, like dropping a ball. And one example she used of Precept's exploration is like the little toddler that takes the toy or the ball and drops it off the high chair. You know, oh, it hit the ground. And the parent's busy doing so, oh, they dropped it again, picks it back up, sets it down. And what does the toddler do? Drops it, looks over the chair again. Oh, it hit the ground again. Same thing happened, you know. So our work with the precepts kind of like that, right? As we take up the way of speaking truthfully and we notice we exaggerate a little bit at work, right? We drop the ball. Oh, and then we get some feedback. How did that feel? Why did I do that? We act, and then we get some evidence. We see the ripple it has in our world. In order for this to really be fruitful for you, I want to encourage you, if you don't already have a daily Zazen practice, please, find a way to bring your Zazen practice to a daily routine, right? This is going to help create the stillness and space that's going to allow for the mindfulness that's necessary in order to conduct this exploration. It's also going to provide you the time for things to digest each day, right? So if you're struggling with the daily Zazen practice, or you are only doing a little bit at a time, we suggest to try and work up to 30 minutes. Just do what you can, even if it's only for 4 minutes or 6 minutes or 8 minutes a day. Make space for yourself for that nourishment, for that time of stillness and silence. And then just add 1 minute a week, right? So if you're able to start with 6 minutes this week, then do 6 minutes. Don't bring judging mind to, oh, I should be doing more. Just do your 6 minutes, and next week do 7, right? And slowly work yourself up. You'll find this very supportive for your life in general and for an exploration like this Precepts program. We really need to open a space where these questions can move and they can get into our bodies. They kind of float down. They come out of our heads and they get into the rest of our nervous systems and into the body. All right, so I've said a lot. I'm going to pause for a moment and see if there's any questions or anything that feels like it needs to be said, or any reflections before I move on. Okay, and we shall move on. So our companion book for this year is Dale Wright's The 6 Perfections. It's on the website page as well. This one we'll use more as a supplemental text. So the Diane Rossetto book is the primary text, and that really gives the outline of the way of working with the precepts, and we're going to follow that pretty closely. But this one provides kind of a different way of looking at the practices, the 6 perfections or 6 paramitas, as a way to work with the precepts. And the subtitle is Buddhism and the Cultivation of Character. So I'm going to just give you a little excerpt from the introduction here. The question my life presses upon me, whether I face it directly or not, is, how shall I live? As what kind of person? All of us face the task of constructing lives for ourselves, of shaping ourselves into certain kinds of people who will live lives of one kind or another, for better or worse. Some people undertake this task deliberately. They make choices in life. They make choices in life in view of an image of the kind of person they would hope to become. From the early beginnings of their tradition, Buddhists have maintained that nothing is more important than the developing the freedom implied in their activity of self-cultivation, of deliberately shaping the kind of life you will live. And although circumstances beyond anyone's control will make very different possibilities available for very different people, Buddhists have always recognized that the differences between those who assume the task of self-sculpting with imagination, integrity, and courage, and those who do not is enormous. And this constitutes in Buddhism the difference between enlightened ways of being in the world and unenlightened ways. At the center of this long-standing Buddhist practice has been a list of, quote, perfections, understood as particular ideals of human character that guide self-cultivation. The perfections provide a concrete image of the human qualities that Buddhists consider truly admirable. One sutra introduces the 6 perfections by having a disciple ask the Buddha, "How many bases for training are there for those seeking enlightenment?" The Buddha responds, "There are 6. Generosity, morality, tolerance, energy, meditation, and wisdom." So the question he asked, or that was answered, was basically, I'm paraphrasing, how many ways of training are there for those seeking enlightenment, right? The question was how should I ask? How do you train for enlightenment? There are 6: generosity, morality, tolerance, energy, meditation, and wisdom. This sutra claims that the 6 perfections are bases for training. This means that they constitute a series of practices or trainings that guide Buddhist practitioners toward the goal of enlightenment or awakening. These 6 trainings are the means or methods to that all-important end. But the perfections are much more than techniques. They're also the most fundamental dimensions of the goal of enlightenment. Enlightenment is defined in terms of these 6 qualities of human character. Together, they constitute the essential qualities of that ideal human state. The perfections, therefore, are the ideal, not just the means to it. Being generous, morally aware, tolerant, energetic, meditative, and wise is what it means for a Buddhist to be enlightened. If perfection in these 6 dimensions of human character is the goal, then enlightenment, understood in this Buddhist sense, would also be closely correlated to these particular practices. Recognizing this, one sutra says, enlightenment just is the path, and the path is enlightenment. To be moving along the path of self-cultivation by developing the 6 perfections is the very meaning of enlightenment. Right, so that's a different way of looking at it, right? These are not 6 things that you do in order to get somewhere. The doing them is the somewhere. If you were to describe what is an enlightened person, you could take it the other way. It is someone who does these 6 things. Cause and effect are one, we often say. So we'll be using bits and pieces of the 6 perfections to help inform us, right? To help to give us the scaffolding of these practices that help us on our path. Time check. 8 o'clock. I know our agenda said 2 hours. I think that was a little bit more time than we'll probably use. In my experience, most of the time these our meetings will probably last closer to 90 minutes, but I put 2 hours on the calendar just to be sure in case we run a little long. But so we're more than halfway there. If you need to stand up and stretch your legs, feel free to do so.
Todd,
Yes.
I was taking some notes. Can you? I only got 5 of the 6 perfections.
Oh,
I
you're damned now. You're never gonna. So let's see, where does he have them here? Generosity, morality, tolerance, energy, meditation, and wisdom.
Oh, I forgot meditation.
Don't forget meditation. All right, so moving on. I want to talk a little bit about one of the writing practices that we use to chart our year together, to chart our progress along the path. So a long time ago, Peg was involved in a academic research program in California, I think as part of her graduate studies, where they were interested, teachers were interested in coming up with an alternative way to chart students' progress. And this was specifically for English as a second language learners' progress in California, that could replace a standardized test for someone who was not a native English speaker and therefore, was at a disadvantage, and standardized test scores were often unreliable or skewed. And so they came up with a way of making observations and documenting learning in a different way. It was very successful. It was originally done for, I believe, for elementary school age children. And then when Peg came to the University of Texas, she was involved in a long project to create an adult version of it for use in her graduate studies. And so we've been using this learning record here for the last, I think this is the 10th or 11th year we've done the Precepts program. I think I participated in it maybe in about 2010, and then began co-teaching the class in 2017. And it's a lovely way to document changes over time. Oh, here we go. Find my notes. So, and this is especially helpful for learning things that are kind of have an undetermined outcome. So Zen practice is perfect, right? So You know, if I were to ask you, okay, at the end of this year, what are you going to know, right? You could probably have many ideas about that or many guesses, but it would probably be hard to predict what you're going to learn, right? This is not like, well, I'm going to learn trigonometry. At the end of the year, I'm not going to know trigonometry. At the end of the year, I'm probably going to be changed. Now, how is that? Well, it's a little hard to determine. So for subjects like this, it's better to have something that's a little more free form. So the learning record is basically, it's analogous to a scientific principle where you have an observer that starts by assessing a particular system or state at the beginning point, and then makes detailed observations over time, snapshots in time. And then there'll be a time in the midpoint for kind of assessing how we're doing, and then some analysis of what you've observed over time, all the while continuing these little observations that are done in mindfulness over time. So there's no real milestones in our Zen practice and our work with the precepts where we say, okay, pass the test on precept 2. Right, so this gives us something to look back on and something to mark our milestones. Much in the same way that you would, take your young child and put them up against the door frame and put a little mark, right? They were here, right? When you come back and look later, like, oh, there's been a change, right? So this is how we're going to see the change. It's an empirical approach based on observations, very detailed present moment observations done in mindfulness. So learning is really change over time. So I'm going to pass out the handouts virtually, which means, once again, going to the website and gotta go back. And so here we are with the learning record. So there's a PDF version and a Word document version for you Microsoft people, if you like. All right, this is really geared and kind of set up as to be printed out, right? We are going to do writings and observations. There's forms to fill out. You're welcome to do it, digitally if you like that, but it's laid out here, designed to be printed out and put in a three-reading binder or so. And we'll just give you a little orientation as to what the sections are and how we're going to be going about this. Lisa, okay, so Lisa had a question. Where did I go to the website? So Lisa, let's see here. There was, oh, thank you, Mary Beth. She just put the link in there for you. Yeah, this page you will not find it in the menu system of the website. It's kind of hidden, so you have to know what the link is. So after we leave the class and you forget where it is, I sent you an email about an hour ago to everyone who's registered. So you should have that link in your email. Of course, feel free to just contact me if you get lost. No, I'm going to use the learning record IRL, as kids say, in real life. All right. So there's the suggestions, that you can print this out. There are several different parts. There's a part A1 and A2 and a mid-year, a part B1, C1. Right. So, and the heart of this course is these observations we're going to do. And the first question you have is, well, what am I going to observe? Right? In the beginning, it can be anything. Right, we're going to observe what's happening in our present moment. We're going to observe our experience with it. And then you could start by just, if you're sitting at the bus stop one day, observing the traffic flow, right? or anything that you encounter in your life. And then as you've done a few and get familiar with the process, we're going to begin to turn that lens towards our working with the precepts, towards what we're noticing. What did I notice came up when I realized I had just made a little exaggeration at work, right? So maybe not capture it then, but shortly thereafter on our lunch break, we can make a little observation. Okay, I noticed I was giving a report and I noticed I inflated what I did a little bit, and here's how I felt, and here's, you're going to observe just like a scientist. So much in the same way as if you were a biologist observing a reforestation project, right? Over many years, you would start with an initial assessment. You would come in and you would do observations every so often of the flora or the fauna or what's changed. So really, this is the kind of lens we're going to use. So part A1 and A2, these are done at the beginning of the course. So let me get to those. So A1, reflections on my own development. So this is where we begin. Take some time to reflect on your own development as a human being up to this point. Focus on positive indicators, capacities, and developments, rather than what you consider your deficits, or difficulties, or shortcomings. Include any reflections that might specifically relate to the subject of this particular learning experience. Class, workshop, in this case, this is the Precepts program, learning experience. So this is just documenting where we are when we start, right? This is our beginning snapshot, right? So you would not just reflect on your own development, but reflect on your own development as it relates to the precepts, right? Do you have some particular history in studying this or observing this? Is it all new for you? Maybe you're one of the people who's repeating the course. We have a lot of people who like to repeat the course, come back over time. And then A2, this is aspirations for development. For A2, little instruction, a very big box, plenty of room to fill out. So take some time to become mindful of your purposes for entering into this learning experience. What are your aspirations for your own learning? What might help or hinder you in realizing your aspirations? What will you need to keep in mind in support of your own learning? How will you monitor or evaluate the learning process in terms of your unfolding aspirations? What relationships will affect the work? So A1 and A2, those are how we begin and where we begin, and what we bring in and what we aspire to. Pretty self-explanatory, I hope. Any questions about that? All right, so mindful observations. This is really the heart of the practice. So part B1 and C1, we probably don't need to talk about today, but they're basically kind of in the midway through the course. That's an opportunity to look back over your observations and take stock, review the observations you've done so far, maybe do a little interpreting, seeing what patterns you see yourself repeating or talking about over. But the mindful observations are really the heart of this. So let's see, you should have, I don't know where it is in the soft copy. Let's see. There we go. Let's do it this way. I just realized I'm holding up sheets of paper and showing them to you in the camera when I've got this right here on the screen. Okay, that's the interim analysis, interim, final. Comments by readers. So this is designed to be personal and confidential. I'll say that. You're not turning these in. You don't have to share them with me. You don't have to share them with anyone. If you do wish to share them with a trusted advisor or spiritual friend or significant other, then this is what this page is for. Any comments or reflections from an outsider. Okay. So here is the mindful observation. I believe this is kind of the instruction sheet. And then here, this is what the blank sheet looks like. So can we make that a little bit smaller? There we go. So there's a form, sensation, perception, thought and emotion, consciousness, relationality, and then a space for future use for reflections or questions. And then, so this form, you would, if you're going to do this by hand, you would print out as many copies as you would need. So, if you're going to do about one a week throughout the year, which is basically what we suggest, then you need 50 copies. So you're going to create quite a little document, right, or artifact of your change over time as you work with the precepts. So it can be very interesting. So going back to how we do an observation. So guidelines and examples for mindful observations. So the first thing is just a note that while there are 6 boxes, form, sensation, perception, thoughts, emotion, consciousness, and relationality, you do not have to fill these out for every one. Part of what you'll learn is what your tendency is. You may be somebody who, when you go to document something, is always very aware of the thought or the emotion or how it felt, right? But maybe you're not, don't have a lot of awareness of your own state of consciousness or awareness of your own forms or physical sensations, right? And so if you don't fill out all of them, one of the observations you might make in the mid-year is like, oh, I'm really kind of person that always talks about my sensations, and I never talk about my thoughts about it, right? So that's more data for you. So we don't have to fill everything out, that's fine. Just put down what you actually noticed. And the key here is to be brief. Use 1 to 3 sentences for each note. And there's a place to put the date on there. And so these are fact-based observations, right? This is not the part of the program where you try to be an analyst about what you think happened, right? Or we don't want you to put your judge's robe on and proclaim yourself guilty and bad, or holier than everyone else and good, right? They're really just going to be basic factual observations. And Peg likes to tell the story about how one of the teachers who was working with the child said, well, the only thing I can observe about him is he can't read. Well, and Peg likes to say, you can't observe that. That's not the fact-based observation we're doing. You can't observe that someone can't read. What actually happens when you give him a reading assignment? You say, well, he can't read, so he just doesn't do anything. You're like, but that's not what you're observing, right? What happens? She said, oh, well, he'll usually kick the chair in front of him a lot, like he's agitated and rock, and then usually he'll scribble for a while, then he always crumples it up and throws it away. Like, an observation, right? So write down, restlessness, moving and kicking in the chair, scribbling but not letters, right? Discarding his work and not showing it to anyone, right? That's the type of observation we want. The other thing that the teacher was bringing, this is a child who can't read, right? That was more of an analysis of what they thought was happening. Right? So this is just a little example of the kinds of observations we would bring. So for form, What was the physical aspect of what you observed? Stick with what might be observed in terms of physical forms and their interactions. Example, my car hit a light pole. My dog was lying in the sun. My friend arrived late and breathless, right? So those are just physical forms of what you actually observed. Not that my friend was irresponsible and showed up 15 minutes late like she always does, right? And then there are the sensations. Oh, and I should say this, the process and how this is broken out is really like trying to bring a more fine-tuned microscope, right? To bring different lenses to these observations, different ways or different categories of how the event unfolded, right? And bringing these different lenses kind of refines our ability to tune in to what we're observing and what's happening. So that's why it's done in this way. So the second one is sensations. What, if any, sensations did you observe? This is a very immediate, basic reaction. And there's really only three in this category of sensations, the way they're described here. There's really attraction, like wanting, grasping, you want that. Aversion, opposite, don't want, go away, don't like, or neutral, like couldn't care less, didn't even notice if I cared or couldn't care or couldn't be bothered, right? So attraction, aversion, or neutral. Right? I was drawn away, I was drawn toward it, I shrank away. I had no reaction. The next box is perceptions. What sensory perceptions did you observe? The car fender folded like origami. My eye was caught by a flight of herons. I heard a mockingbird outside the window. It felt smooth, right? Feelings, hearing, seeing. The next are thoughts and emotions. What thoughts or emotions did you observe? Suddenly, I felt afraid to open the door. He shouldn't have left them here. Had the thought of that I'm always so confused. Or she's never coming back. Now, consciousness. This is more of the kind of the background level of consciousness. If you can bring any awareness to that as you're making the observation of what happened. What did you notice about the underlying quality of the consciousness? Were you agitated or calm, swift or slow moving, dark or angry or happy, expansive or narrow, muddled or clear? Right? So often we bring to things this, excuse me, I need to scroll, sorry. Getting lost between the virtual paper and the real paper. So this is our kind of background state of consciousness, kind of what was the C state as things, when whatever we're observing was happening. Were things flat, calm, and peaceful? Were they raging? Were you still stirred up from some past event? Often, we all maybe know someone whose background state of consciousness is maybe, always agitated or angry. Not that that's any of us, of course, right? But who's just looking for someone to lash out at, right? So that's kind of that background state of consciousness that was there before the triggering event, right? The examples, all of this was happening, but I was unconcerned about it. Or I was jittery and on edge. Or my general annoyance erupted into anger. Make sense? Background consciousness? Okay. And then the last one, which was not normally used in the learning record, but it's part of the relational aspect of our Zen practice here, is the relationality of it. What was the relational quality of what you observed? Did you notice how your activity or interactions affected the connections in the situation? Did they reflect some degree of healthy or unhealthy attachment or attunement right? For example, maybe if you were this involved another person and you realize you didn't even notice how they reacted, right? Well, there's a bit of data. I was unaware of the relational aspect or not paying attention, right? Did the interaction and connectedness move relationship toward more freedom, compassion, curiosity, and intimacy? And then she gives examples. She looked as though I had slapped her. He calmed down and breathed a sigh when he heard what I said. We both started laughing. Does that make sense? Okay, a couple head nods. Any questions about the observations? So these practices, these observing practices, they're going to help us hone our skills for observing, right? They're going to exercise that observational muscle that to make it a bit more second nature. And again, we ask that you try and do one a week. You know, if you want to try and do more, of course, go for it. You can do as many as you want. It's all just data that you'll come back and look at later. And then lastly, you may want to discuss what you're observing with a teacher or Zen mentor. You know, at any time you can set up time with myself for practice discussion, or any of the other teachers or any of the other Zen mentors here. All of them, I believe, have been through the Precepts program, and they're happy to work with you on this. Often the talking about it is very helpful, right? Because we have a tendency to, just like when we write or do free writing, our thoughts and reflections come out in a different way. When we're forced to try and communicate them to another, often they get unpacked in ways we didn't expect, and it can be very supportive. So that's available to you at any time. I encourage that. Okay. So we've been through a lot so far. Take a deep breath. Questions, comments, reflections?
And Todd, could you take us back to not the screen sharing, but a general thing so that we can see each other as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
And Todd, I would like to offer something that was offered to me. And I'm a visual learner. And when I got the learning record, I just want to share what I did because I was a little overwhelmed. And I went to Peg and she guided me to put this notebook together. If you can see that, let me turn off my video.
You're blurry.
Yeah, my virtual black background. I didn't make my bed. Oh, well. So it's just a little notebook like this. And I've got I put the agenda. This is an old one. But, and then I put tabs in here. And one tab is, all my observations. And I actually printed up 50 for the year. Yeah. So Todd has one too.
Yeah. Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah. And I have one here for work samples, another tab for work samples, and I filed them there. It was just a way to keep me organized. And I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. It's so great to hear from someone who's done it before. As long as you're speaking, right, is there anything you'd like to say about, besides how you organized it in a binder, what it was like, right? Did you learn more than maybe you were expecting? What were your reflections on using the learning record, and was it useful?
It was useful when I used it. And actually before this class, I went back and looked at it And it's just amazing the things that have transpired in my life that I was saying in here that have actually developed since 2013. So it was, and I dug it up from a box in the garage. So it was just really interesting. It felt daunting at the time I was doing it, but I'm so glad that I have it now. I learned a lot, and I know I will learn a lot more this time too.
Great, thank you for sharing.
Can I ask Mary Beth, how often do you find yourself referring back to it?
I haven't until now. Like, it's been in the garage for years.
Okay.
But when I was taking the precepts before, I was using it actively.
Okay.
Todd.
Yeah.
Nelda, I have a similar one. And I decided to pull mine out. I haven't looked at it yet, but as we go week to week, I'm going to compile our month to month with the lessons, everything from that month behind the very same month from the previous time, and then take some time to look at that transition, at that change. I'm very excited about that aspect, actually.
It sounds like an excellent idea. It's really a very useful way to take these snapshots. And really, I think it's, one of the only ways that we have where we can really see the change over time, where we can see how we've grown, right? Because if not, at the end of this year, you just kind of have this vague recollection of, yeah, I kind of remember being confused when I was coming in, maybe, right? But it's hard to make any kind of concrete sense of it. So that's the use of it. It's very useful. Joan, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay, this is an observation about me.
Okay.
And it's pretty deep, it's pretty firm observation. I'm 84 years old and I feel tired. And it makes me think, what am I going to do to get through this and feel alive in it?
Yeah, so you have some trepidation about taking this on, it sounds like. Yeah. So that's what you're bringing to it. That's where you begin. I see nothing wrong with that. I don't see that as an issue that needs to be resolved. That's just like, oh, the wind's blowing out of the north today.
Well, I look at it as a hindrance as to not how I'm going to proceed. I don't know.
Well,
that's just an observation for right now. Yeah.
Joan, I'd like to share with you my own hesitation in coming to it, which is that my health's unpredictable and pretty extreme sometimes. And so I was sort of like, oh, I won't be able to bring as much or get as much from it and so on. And so what I really decided what I was doing here is I will be here as fully as I can at that time. And that's the whole of what I could bring. It's the whole of what any of us can bring.
Yeah.
And so to not take that on as stress for myself, because that works against my health issues.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
A little compassion to ourselves as well.
I'll just echo Becky. I have long-standing issues with fatigue. I'm only in my 60s, but these started probably in my 20s. And so I have to do the same thing. It's my way out of the shame or thinking that there's something wrong with me for being tired has been to realize that this is just how I am. And to to really do what Becky said, bring myself as fully as I can at that time. And that's not just at the class meetings, it's to every part of it. When I feel in this course, when it comes to writing down one of these observations, it's going to be the same thing, as fully as I can in that moment.
Thank you. Well, this gives me some insight too. If I do it early in the day, I'll probably have more vitality. But night times is not the best time to really function well. That's a learning thing too. Thank you anyway. Hope that was useful for somebody else too.
It sounds like it was. Thank you. All right, so time check, Bodhisattvas. It's 8:30. The last topic that I was a little bit waffling about getting into was Hakomi, and I think what we'll do is maybe I'll spend just a couple minutes saying a little something about it, but we'll save the meat of it for next class, where I think we'll have first we'll have a little more time, and then secondly, we might have some of you in the room here together, and I'd like to do some one-on-one exercises, which we can do online for those who won't be in person. We'll do them virtually, but it'll be a little easier, at least for me personally, to manage, I think. Also, we have some excellent Hakomi resources here in our Zen Sangha. We have several people who have gone through the year-long Hakomi training. We have some people that are practice this therapeutic modality in their professional work, and I might just be able to rope one of them into being one of the guest teachers next week and having someone a little more skilled to take you through it. So with that, maybe I will just give you a little taste of what it is and why we're going to be talking about it, and then we'll wrap up a little early. So Hakomi was developed by a guy named Ron Kurtz, who was a psychotherapist. And this is something that Flint feels very strongly about and has used it and taught about it. And it's worked its way into some of the practices we do here at Appamada. So for some of you, I don't know all of you or how much dealings you've had with us here in the way we practice here at Appamada, but and this all started with Joko's approach to practice. She was really interested in a psychologically minded approach to practice. She was not a psychologist or psychotherapist, not at all. She wasn't trained in that way, but she noticed how Buddhist practice and Zen practice seemed to, what its limitations were. While it could have wonderful kind of transformational effects for people to find some more ease and freedom in their life, there's many things it couldn't do, right? And there's people that often had other problems that they would kind of compartmentalize and ignore. So Joko was always very interested in how to prevent that from happening. And so her way of turning towards everything that was happening in your life, using your life as practice, uncovering your core beliefs. If any of you have read Joko's books, these should sound familiar. Her approach was began to be noticed by many people in the healing professions, in therapeutic professions, and she attracted a lot of therapists. She had a lot of therapists as students, and we have the same kind of thing here. We have Flint, who was a practicing psychotherapist, and I've lost count of how many Sangha members that I've met who are also therapists. So again, I'm just giving you a little bit of explanation of, in case you're wondering, why are we talking about psychotherapy things, in a Buddhist center? It's just because it turns out when you do a lot of self-reflection, when you do a lot of meditation, a lot of things come up that you didn't realize was there. And so we're giving tools for how to work with them. And in particular, Hakomi is very congruent with Zen practice and with these mindful observations that we're going to be doing for the learning record. So Hakomi has been, it is a body-centered psychotherapeutic approach. So body-centered, meaning it spends a lot of time paying attention to what's going on in the physical form, in thoughts, feelings, perceptions, sensations, etc. It's also been termed as assisted self-study in mindfulness. So it is a self-study in mindfulness, but with a framework that gives you assistance. And there's a long handout on the website. It's under the handouts that I showed you before. I won't bring it up now because we aren't going to read through it all. But if you want to delve deeper in it, you can use the handout. Flint says, we use this to learn about how we organize our experience, but also how this organization is a reflection of our core beliefs and conditioning. The Hakomi method is an elegant and precise method of self-study. It's a form of mindful investigation and is not only a gateway to the understanding of complex interdependent systems and the interdependent nature of our lives, but also the possibility of freedom from suffering, which is an important goal, right? Important goal in both psychotherapy and Buddhist practice, the relief of suffering. Through assisted self-study in the Hakomi method, we not only learn about how we organize experience, but also how this organization is a reflection of our core beliefs and conditioning. So I'm sure everybody's probably familiar with how we use the term conditioning here, but just our conditioned behavior, conditioned habitual reflexes to how we meet the world. So through Hakomi, we become aware of how this conditioning and these beliefs shape our behaviors and our relationships in ways that might be limiting or painful. And we have the opportunity to begin to wake up. And what we wake up to is the fact that we have all the raw material we need. We have everything we need to heal and to awaken spiritually. Each of us is a full expression of ultimate reality. There's nothing missing. Everything that goes into the formation of our body and mind is intimately and infinitely connected with everything else in the universe. And what this points to is that everything is a result of something else. Everything is a result of something else. Everything, an event, comes into being through a contingent web of causes and conditions. And this chain of association is without end. We can wake up to this fact, which is the basic realization that the Buddha had under the Bodhi tree. And we, like the Buddha, can come into a full appreciation of mutual causality through meditation practice. So the basic method of Hakomi is to create a healing relationship. Now, if you read the handouts, this is really written for psychotherapy clients and practitioners, right? So the therapist and the client, right? So in our mode, you get to play double duty. And most of the time, you're going to be both. This is the self-assisted study in mindfulness. So just pointing that out, when you hear client and therapist, take it with a grain of salt. So, but the basic mode is loving presence. So, and Ron talks about this as kind of the foundation that creates a space that can allow all this transformation to happen. Loving presence. It's a special state of mind and way of being. It's open-hearted, well-intentioned. It should feel pleasant and healthy and rewarding to the one who's trying to cultivate that loving presence. It's a big part of healthy relationships, right? We definitely know how it feels when it's lacking, when we're ignored or disrespected. It would remind us of someone who cares and has the time to listen, right? Someone who's not rushed, someone who's present and listening, who can really pay attention. And learning how to do that well is what this Hakomi practice is all about. So inhabiting the state of loving presence. And when we go into the exercises, we'll talk about it a little bit more. And so with that as the ground, the method of Hakomi is to establish some mindfulness, right? Some internal awareness, reflection of what's going on in our world and in ourselves. It's self-observing. It's noticing one's own present experience. It's available for what's happening now. So it's a useful state for our inquiry, right? So this is the kind of state, this is how we tie the two together. When we're doing our mindful observations, we're kind of using this Hakomi method of bringing a loving presence to whatever you might discover that might come up. This is kind of like you're being the client and you being the therapist, and the client, right, is what might come out of you. Oh, I noticed I was had angry consciousness, right? We want to bring that state of loving presence to that. So this is how they're tied together and why we use them. And then in the state of mindfulness, we're going to do little experiments in mindfulness. We're going to drop little pebbles in our pond and see what it evokes. And in the state of mindfulness, we're going to notice reactions or conditionings or things that we believe. It's going to help in our growth. And then as we get into it, we'll talk about how we process that and what we do with it. And we've got a couple exercises that we'll get into that offer us little glimpses into how it works. But I think that's enough for tonight. So if you do want to get ahead, if you feel like it, you can read the handout on Hakomi. But definitely read the chapters 1 through 5 of the Rosetto book. So again, we've got on the website, you've got the class plan. And so that is here, Precepts Program Schedule. So for next class, we're going to read Rosetto chapters 1 through 5. And I think you'll find it enjoyable. It's a light read. So any parting questions or comments? Anything that's not clear or that you need to discuss? Okay, well, thank you for your patience. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
Todd, it's now before you leave the Zendo tonight, do you have a few minutes to meet me there? I need to talk with you or someone about the altar before services tomorrow.
Yes, I'll be here.
Thank you.
All right, if there's nothing else, I thank you so much for your participation. it's very heartening to see this. You know, I know a lot of people express frustration in our society and our world and the way things have been going the last few years, and they seem to be going in a unhealthy and unwholesome direction. And so just take a moment to look around the room. There's 25 people who have signed up to do nothing but try and develop an ethical practice, an ethical way of meeting people in life, right? So this is the antidote, right? You guys are gonna digest this and you're gonna carry it out into the world, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd.